Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Minority of One report with your host, Desiree Rover from the Netherlands. And I have in my virtual studio a very important person because he explains how our governments are psychopathic. And, well, that other word, you can pronounce it, Greg. I'm not going to try to do the title.
The title is actually The Joys of Psychopathocracy. Yes, there you go. Why criminality is essential to effective modern government, our rebirth in the wake of their destruction of our world. This book was like 7 years in the making. I actually got this book, almost wrote itself in my brain while I was imprisoned in Beaumont, Texas in 2010. I actually tell the story about that and why they put me away for being an herbalist. We know how dangerous it is to have a planet where people actually work with plants. It's a very dangerous thing indeed. So anyways, and by the way, I go into the specifics of my case exhaustively. I mean, just for anyone really wanted to know. And
yeah, well, you are a criminal for being an herbalist. That's very clear. The FDA doesn't like that. The Federal Death Association, I call them. Yeah, it's amazing.
So, yeah, so to kind of give an overview, I mean, the fundamentals of the fundamental faults that lie at the very foundation of our modern concept of government is pretty much well documented in the anarchistic extant literature. I mean, even the founder of modern sociology, the German sociologist Max Weber, goes into extensive detail why governments are basically criminal. But what I thought was, you still have a world full of people who actually rely on government and actually look to government to solve the world's problems. And there's such a proliferation of people who have that mindset that I thought it was really important to create an actual very, very simple, it actually sounds more complex than it really is, a very simple method of social analysis to show that it is not possible for governments to ever be anything other than fundamentally criminal. And the starting point for my work actually came to me in a kind of a read while I was in prison of Marshall Solon's book, Stone Age Economics, which was written in 1972. And what he does, which is really quite interesting, he creates this structure. Let's see if you can actually see this graph. This is kind of important. It's kind of the linchpin around which everything else rotates. The structure where at the center of these concentric circles you have general reciprocity, you have absolute love, you have the relationship between mother and child, and then you have the relationship between members of the family, and you have the lineal sector, the village sector, the tribal sector, the intertribal sector. The farther you get out in these concentric circles, the farther you get away from the fundamental foundation of life, which is unconditional love. We all know what unconditional love is. We all know that a mother brings a child into the world. She's not expecting that child to support her, and she doesn't expect anything from that child. The relationship is one of just love. And as we get farther and farther away from this fundamental energy that is at the basis of life, the farther we get away from the fundamentals of life itself. It says in the Upanishads, the purpose of creation is the expansion of happiness. And what is that? That's another way of saying that the universe is based in love. I can tell you that from the ayahuasca journeys that I've done, when you actually look at subatomic particles, when you actually are in that altered state of consciousness, even on the level of subatomic particles, everything is guided by love. The mutual attraction between electrons and protons. We reduce it to this very sterile mechanistic set of principles that guide us in physics, but at a very deeper, much deeper level. Unconditional love is the glue that holds the entire universe together.
I agree.
It's in a cosmic sense, when you achieve a cosmic, when you have this cosmic sense, cosmic consciousness, the Brahmic state, whatever you have, which I have been in and out of since I was 22. And I explain that in another book called The Gospel of 2012, According to Ayahuasca, that I wrote 5 years ago. It's best embodied in a poem by Walt Whitman, who was also in the cosmic state when he wrote this. And the poem reads, I am he who aches with amorous love. Does the earth not gravitate? Do not all matter attract all other matter? So the body of me to all I know or meet. That is the perception of unconditional love at the foundation of creation from the cosmic consciousness, from a cosmically conscious perspective. And so from there I said, well, what were to happen if we were trying to reorder everything around us, governments, NGOs, all these institutions, all these things, these various bodies that we rely upon? What if we were to try to fit them into that graph? Well, they won't fit in that graph because they go beyond the outer line where we pass from reciprocity into negative reciprocity. I create a new word in English to summate it. I truncate it down to negaprocity. And what I do is, which I thought was very novel, certainly no one had ever done it before. What I did is I created something where what can I compare this to? Everyone knows what you do with a house. You don't have to be educated to know that the refrigerator goes in the kitchen, and the beds go in the bedroom, and the dining room table goes in the dining room, and the living room couch goes in the living room. Nobody needs to tell you this. Nobody gets educated in this. You just know it. You know how to reorder everything within this world. It is your micro world. It's your home. And yet outside that home, in the world at large, we have all these institutions around us, but you don't know where they get placed. You don't know where the appliances and the furniture are supposed to be placed relative to you and your interests, and even with your relationship to the planet. I think it's kind of important. It's kind of important to have an understanding that although people understand what they do with the interior of a house, regardless of the houses that they're living in, but they have no idea mentally where to position the institutions that have more influence over them and the planet than anything else. Nothing else even comes close. So what I did was, which I thought was novel, is I created this thing called Caton's negaprocity chart. And it's on page 44 of the book. I don't know where it is on the Kindle version. I
have it here. Yeah.
So on page 44, and as you go through this chart, the farther you get away from reciprocity, the further criminality reigns, lack of reciprocity reigns, chaos ensues, entropy is magnified, all these other things that actually have an effect on the planet at large. Now, we're in the middle of something that is variously referred to right now as the Holocene extinction event. We are currently losing 150 to 200 species a day. When I wrote a book in 1985 called Lumen Food for a New Age. I sold 45,000 copies. And in that book, which I wrote over 30 years ago, I talked about these dead zones that are growing in the Gulf of Mexico. They got all this agricultural refuge going down the Mississippi. And you have these large areas in the Gulf of Mexico. It's these pools that are 50 miles wide, 150 miles deep, and everything in those dead zones, well, that's how you get the name. They are dead. There's maybe a few microbes, maybe a few, extremophils that can survive inside, but basically everything in there is dead. And since Fukushima, we now have an explosion of these dead zones. And what most people don't understand, and this is a fundamental principle of evolutionary biology, is whether we're talking about Homo sapiens or any other species, what causes a species to go extinct? And any evolutionary biologist will tell you it's collapse of habitat. And what are we experiencing worldwide right now? We are experiencing collapse of habitat, whether we're talking about the coral reefs off of Australia, or we're talking about the coastline of British Columbia, where everything is dying or either dead or already dying. I mean, we are basically living on a dying planet. And the point that I try to make is the common narrative that the intellectual whores in these various disciplines that border on ecology and oceanography, the various disciplines that would somehow impact the discussion that we're having right now, they will say, well, this is all anthropogenic. It's your fault. And it's my fault too. We're the ones who are destroying the planet. But what I try to point out is that the leadership for all of this emanates from governmental entities, and they are fundamentally negaprosthetes. It's a new word. People have got to understand the concept. And they take energy. They're energy parasites. They're basically, governments are basically energy vampires. And the impact this has ultimately ecologically is to actually destroy a planet. And I understand that if you're into world history and whether you're a student of the great British historian Arnold Toynbee or the great German historian Oswald Spengler, or perhaps you're into the American, Will and Ariel Durant, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Sure, we've had 26 iterations in the last 6,000 years, but each cycle got us closer and closer and closer to the stage we're at now, which is where we have this blood-sucking, this whole concept of we're never going to get to one world order. It's never going to happen. I will tell you why. Because one world order would maximize entropy and destroy the planet and everything on it even faster than we are now. We're sucking the life out of the planet. And I understand there's some intuitive leaps here. I understand that I'm kind of going through this quickly, and I'm not able in the course of, even a 1-hour interview to basically give an explanation of the book as deep as the book itself, because it's got numerous references and links and everything. It lays it all out, and I'm hoping that people who care about these issues, who care about the fact that you've got people like Professor Guy McPherson to say, look, humanity's got 10 to 15 years left on the planet. And I speak privately to biologists and those who are not on the payroll of some larger corporation or government institution. They're speaking in very, very dire terms in terms of where we're at right now. So the book ends. I don't want to think everything's a bummer here. I don't want to think that I'm I'm completely sold out on doom porn. I do believe something positive comes out of this. I do believe, and I make this very clear, like I say, in this other work that I did 5 years ago, The Gospel of 2012 According to Ayahuasca, that I associate with shamans who, there's many ways of acquiring human knowledge. You don't acquire human knowledge just by talking to people, reading books, going to lectures or conferences, or there's other ways of using entheogenic compounds. This is the other part of my work as an herbalist, using various compounds other than ayahuasca, vilca seed, malakawa, various forms of brugmansia. I mean, there's all kinds of things here that can be done to expand the range of human consciousness to acquire knowledge. And the only good reason, the only real useful reason for using these plant materials is to acquire knowledge of our present condition, knowledge of future timelines in a multiverse, acquire knowledge about solutions. So I associate with these indigenous peoples because they're dramatically underappreciated by Western society. They're underappreciated because what? Because they don't know how to use an iPhone, so we don't need to listen to the things that knowledge they've acquired over thousands of years. So, and I'm here to tell you, this might be just the most important part of the interview. I'm here to tell you that there is an amazing set of homogeneous principles that you see in the things that people are reporting, that there's similarities across the board, that we are headed for this grand divine event that basically basically turns over the apple cart. And I go into great length about that. It's a cosmic event. It has something to do, there's something that emanates from the galactic core, the galactic center. And I actually do a cross comparison of what I was told with things that are being picked up by everything from the people who practice Dolores Cannon's QHHT techniques, and people who are like myself, very experienced psychonauts who deal in a lot of these entheogenic materials. And we feel something is on the way, because in the absence of that, in the absence of some kind of exterior intervention, we're headed for a lifeless planet. We are headed for because the governments of the world, they're not able to help themselves. There's nothing they can do about it. they're taking us to a place where we have a full-bore declaration of war on carbon-based life forms, which of course includes us.
Yeah.
And it's like we're all together. We're all together right now. We're all together in an airplane. There's 8 billion of it. That's you and me and all of our fellow humans and other advanced life forms. We're all in an airplane, and the pilot and the co-pilot they're kamikaze pilots, and we can't get into the cabin to change
the crew.
Yeah, to change the crew.
Yeah.
Set things right. So.
Yeah.
That being the case, there has to be something exterior, and one could say, well, yeah, you use hallucinogenics, so maybe this is some kind of epiphenomenon of the material you use, but I think not.
No, I think not either, because what you describe from your ayahuasca experience, I have experienced in simple life moments when I was in a very difficult situation when my son died. That was the moment that I had something that can be compared with ayahuasca, because I know that I did that in a later stage of my life. So I could compare the two. And the point that I came to in both instances was unconditional love. Exactly what you said. Yeah.
It is. It's a profound.
Absolutely. It's the principle.
It's a profound experience. I have this thing when I wrote the Gospel of 2012, I had this experience where I was allowed. I'm not the only one to have this. I don't want to make it look like I'm special. I'm not the only one to have this experience. But on the other hand, I only have the right to tell my own experience. But yeah. I'm sure there are others who could tell you the same thing. I actually entered into the mind of the Creator at the moment of creation.
Okay.
And the experience of just the cup overflows, as it were, just such immense love and desire to experience the expansion of his own, to share in his own joy and infinite bliss. I mean, it was an overwhelming experience, and one that I wish that everybody could have, and I believe at some point everybody will have. One of the things that when Richard Reese Buck wrote Cosmic Consciousness in 1901, he said it was his belief, and I believe the same thing, that consciousness was growing. Keep in mind, this is something written, 117 years ago, and that we would see more and more and more people having these experiences of cosmic awareness. But to have that experience, it really, when you juxtapose it with where the world is today, you just realize how far off kilter we are, because we've got a world that's completely turned upside down. It's completely in defiance of the very natural laws that are at the foundation of creation. But to experience that, it's one thing to actually kind of have the intellectual awareness of it or read it somewhere or whatever, but it's entirely different when you actually, on the level of your consciousness,
I agree.
See creation unfolding, and then you realize just how far off course we are. It's a startling experience. There's nothing else. There's no other experience I have that I can compare to it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and what I see happening in my field of research, giving birth in a hospital, everything is aimed at severing that connection with the cosmos in the baby and in the mother and in the father. Everything they do in a hospital is aimed at so the people won't get to that place that you're describing.
Oh yeah, and then of course that this is more prevalent in the U.S. than it is in Europe, and then if you're a male child going through circumcision, which is just unbelievably traumatic, unbelievable, an act of trauma beyond belief for an infant. Days old. I mean, well, and the reason for this is because, and I go into the considerable detail in the joys of psychopathocracy about this, is because when you pass from reciprocity to negaprocity, when you cross the line, when you cross into the realm where the values of your world are How can I have a relationship with you and I take advantage of you? How can I consistently be a winner and you be a loser? When that becomes the highest value that guides your culture, then all your values get flipped.
Yeah.
So if I were to say to you, for example, if I were to say to you, the medical community has a moral and an ethical obligation to kill you, to poison you, to take your money. They have a sacred duty to destroy your life. The average person is going to go, what? What are you saying? Okay, but when you change the foundation of the value system that guides your culture, then everything gets flipped. Everything gets flipped. The educators have a moral and an ethical obligation to destroy the lives of children.
Yeah.
Churches have a moral and an ethical responsibility to morally destroy the lives of the people that are in their care. The governments have a moral and an ethical responsibility to lie to their constituents, to pass laws that make people's lives miserable and more burdened. And everything gets turned upside down when you cross into a realm where the fundamental principles that guide your society change from reciprocity to its opposite.
Yeah.
And that's what we have. And so we have built on lies, and we have people walking around who are surrounded by cognitive dissonance at every turn and don't know what to do about it. They don't know what to do about it. They're trying to function in a world where they know the basic rules. As I've got to do something, I've got to make a living, I've got to pay the rent or pay my mortgage, and I've got to pay the utilities or whatever it is. They understand these basic rules that guide their day-to-day lives, but they have no idea where all these institutions fit in the big picture and how profoundly they are affected by them, and how their value system is completely reordered to be in opposition to natural law itself. And so anyways, that's fundamentally why I produced this book. And like I say, I had the idea for it in the summer of 2010. I didn't actually start working on it until last summer. So that was 7 years. I finally decided to put it out because I see so many things around me that where people are just completely ignorant about what it would take to set the ship right. I mean, if you were on the Titanic, and there was a way, of course, in this case it probably wasn't, but there was a way to plug the hole and set the ship right and make it to New York. Yeah, it would kind of be important to know that if you have a sinking ship, if it's within your power to close up the hole, that's probably the first order of business. It'd be kind of important to know that. Well, similarly, it's kind of important to know that we live on a planet that has a large hole in the hull, and the water's leaking in. And once again, we're losing 150 to 200 species a day. And I can give constant examples because I'm down here next to the Amazon. I'm talking to you, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, from 10,000 feet in the Andes Mountains, because this is where I live. I live at 10,000 feet. But I spend a lot of time in the Amazon and other areas of Ecuador because and I moved here because as an herbalist, I like the fact that they're a lot closer to nature here. I mean, you don't have, I do things here every week that if I did them in the United States, it's at least good for 15 to 20 years in fed time in the States, okay? Every week I do stuff. Some of the stuff I take, are you kidding? Half the things in my refrigerator are entheogenic. The DEA knew it was in my refrigerator. They probably put my refrigerator on the Interpol red list.
Good for you, Greg. Way to go.
Marijuana, all this stuff that's going on in the States about marijuana.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Down here, marijuana and coca leaf and vilca seed and all these other things that have powers to extinguish. They're not narcotics. They're like vegetables. We have in Ecuador, all these things have their own food group. When you buy marijuana in Ecuador, it comes with its own minimum recommended daily allowance. I'm joking, but what I'm trying to get at is it so far, especially in your other Western countries, so far afield. Here, we're much closer to nature, and we can do things that are very illegal in these other Western countries. By the way, you'd never get people here not to do these things because it's ubiquitous. It's so woven into the culture that you couldn't go down here to shamans and say, well, you're not allowed to pick ayahuasca vine anymore. You're not allowed to pick vilca seeds. You're not allowed to, you'd never get away with it. It's like, you might as well go home and say, oh, by the way, we're going to charge you, because back when we were young, how you used to like drink water and you didn't have to pay for it. And then you had the proliferation of the bottled water companies, right? So now what used to be considered a human right, access to water, you have to pay for it. So if the governments of the world could get away with it, you'd be forced to pay for the right to breathe. If they could do that and find a way to regulate it.
You're getting there.
Well, yeah. You want to breathe, you want to continue to breathe, well, we're going to charge you for access to the oxygen because, you're using a carbon footprint. We can't allow you to breathe without paying for it. This is the insane world that we have entered into. And but here we're able to get away with it. And that's the reason I'm here. So I'm here because there's things that I consider fundamental human rights. We, at least at this juncture, we still have them here. They don't have them in the States. There's no human rights in the States.
No.
Anyway, that's my view, my take on things.
No, I agree. And in the Netherlands, it's not much better. And what I see is what you said, the cognitive dissonance in people. Simple logical thinking is gone.
Oh yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, there was a Flemish video. There were boys in Belgium, 17-year-old, 16-year-old. They were asking girls questions, and it was hilarious in one idea, but basically it was awful because one of the questions was, which tone is higher, an allochtone or an autochtone? And the girls never knew that question was nonsense. And they performed as if they were doing multiple choice because that is the way they are trained at school. So they try to figure out which one was the higher tone. While it is about people, an autochtone is a civilian living in a country, and an allochtone is an import person, like we have now all over the bloody place.
Oh, well, you have got this guy here in the States. I don't know if you know this. There's got this guy named Mike Dees who goes out. No, not excuse me. Mark Dice, that goes out and does these surveys, and just to show how absolutely astonishingly stupid people are. They did this survey. In fact, I wrote an essay about this a few months ago. It was on the Ashwin, this kind of blog that I have. And they had this petition where they were convincing people to sign a survey outline dihydrogen monoxide, which of course kind of a way of saying water, H2O, dihydrogen monoxide.
Yeah.
Without second thought, without giving it, he had all these people signing this petition to outlaw water.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing that we live in this.
Yeah. Well, and in the same vein, doctors are being educated in study medicines. And they never ask the question whether the information that they get from all those books and all those professors, whether that information is correct, whether it has anything to do with reality, whether it has anything to do with curing or healing, because those are no words in medicine.
Yeah,
the word is treatment.
This medical doctor, I've spoken to her several times, Jennifer Daniels. She was a Harvard.
Oh, yeah. She's great. Yeah.
She basically, I'll wait years and years and years. When am I going to learn how to cure something? And we'll get to that. We'll be patient. We'll get to it.
Never.
Finish the whole thing, and she finds out,
Yeah.
But the thing you mentioned right now about, they don't question the underlying assumptions. This was very poignantly brought out when Thomas S. Kuhn wrote his book in 1963 entitled The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And I cover this in chapter 4 of Metatopia, an online book that I have. And yeah, it's that, and not only are they not told to question these underlying assumptions, but they're penalized for finding defects in the prevailing paradigm.
Yeah.
So basically what you have is, you have in science, in modern science, this incredibly absurd religion, because it is a religion. Science has nothing.
Yeah, it's absolutely religion. Yeah.
Science Yeah, most people don't grasp this, but science has nothing to do with the impartial acquisition of knowledge. Science is not about knowledge. Science is about the search for a consensus among an authoritative elite who will tell the rest of us what to think. But science is not about the impartial acquisition of knowledge. Well, we have a hypothesis. We have scientific method. Well, we follow the scientific. Yeah, they follow the scientific method. That's why these medical journals, JAMA, New England Journal of Medicine, British Lancet, keep having to retract all these scientific studies because they're bullshit, right? And that's why they have to keep coming back with these retractions. I've written an article about that recently as well. Yeah, it's absurd. It's absurd.
Totally crazy.
I deal with something that's been a cancer cure for the last 500 years. They discovered the cure for cancer 500 years ago, and they tried to cure it. They discovered. I get into the whole thing of ascorbemia on chapter 4. I think it's really important for people to understand this. Dr. James Lind discovered the cure for scurvy on the HMS Salisbury in 1748. Took almost 200 years for vitamin C to be accepted as the cure for scurvy and subclinical of ascorbemia, because they did everything, and I actually get into the history of this, they did everything possible to obscure and prevent people from having a knowledge.
Absolutely.
Where something as simple as sailors eating oranges and grapefruits on board ship was the cure that was known about in 1748. So, I get into this. The whole history of medicine is one big, gigantic scandal.
It is. Yeah, I know.
And it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. It's like right now, with chemotherapy having a 2% success rate.
Oh, it's crazy.
The only reason it's 2% is because those are the people who have a strong enough immune system when they get started to survive the brutal effects of chemotherapy. And yet people go in there. What's really scandalous? I just can't believe this. I have my wife still runs a herbal company. You wouldn't believe the number of people that call us that are doctors and oncologists who will tell us on the phone, when you're taking someone's order and you're getting their credit card information, often, someone's credit card will say, William B. Smith, MD, so we're taking this down and oh, you're a medical doctor. Well, have you ever used any of our products with any of your cancer patients? Oh, no, I could never do that. This is for an uncle or a cousin or my mother or somebody related to. And I never, and very rarely do I get a sense of moral hazard, because what they're saying without actually verbally saying it out loud is, look, if it's someone in my family, if it's someone that I care about, I'm going to use something that I know cures cancer. But, and forgive me for using the vernacular, if it's my patients, fuck them. I'm going to use what the government tells me to use. I don't care what happens to them. This is my livelihood.
They're following directions.
This is insane. And the very fact that this is rampant, the whole entire establishment is like this. I mean, it's in a world where morals were rooted in reciprocity. This would be scandalous beyond words. Scandalous beyond words. But it's not scandalous. It's not scandalous because we live in a society where if you can make money off something, again, you have a moral and ethical responsibility to destroy the lives of others and make a buck off of them.
Yeah. It is truly amazing. I work with a doctor who was stricken from the record, of course, because he has been healing himself. He has prostate cancer. And he's still alive after 13 years. And he developed a method to put chlorophyll into the body and cancer cells. He gives it a coating with a bit of sugar and fat and I don't know. But anyway, cancer cells, they gobble it all up. And then he puts light on the tumor, exactly the same frequency as the chlorine chlorophyll. And that makes that the DNA breaks because the light, the biophotons, will give off an electrical spark, and which breaks the cancer DNA of not only the cell but also of the mitochondria. So what happens is then you have a lot of debris where the tumor used to be, and the body has to take care of taking that out.
and the resulting necrosis. Yeah.
They are after him. You won't believe it. It's amazing.
Yeah, but it's worse than that. They throw Dr. Reich anything.
Least of all himself, mind you.
Yeah.
Because they told him the only thing you are entitled to is euthanasia. Literally.
It's insane. It's insane. It's a world turned upside down. It's insane. I knew somebody that we treated and cured their cancer here in Ecuador, and we're on the well on the way to. It was we'll never know because there was no autopsy, but he was well on the way to being cured by it, but because of the fact that his ex-wife, his daughter and his ex-wife just hounded him mercilessly that he should need to go in and see a doctor and this and that.
Yeah, that's the end.
And without consulting us, he went into the hospital. They said, just as a preventative measure, we still think you should have chemo. And
Yeah.
And he was doing what he was doing. Well, he agreed to do this, and he was dead 3 weeks later. He was dead within 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But
it's voodoo. It's literal voodoo. And doctors will tell their patients, oh, you have this and that cancer stage, something. You have 3 months to live. That's voodoo.
Yeah.
Putting a spell on a patient.
But that same phenomenon exists across the board in all aspects of our culture. All aspects. This destructive, psychopathic. And they enjoy it. That's why the book's title is "The Joys of Psychopathocracy." I tell the story. I went to Narva, Estonia. As you leave, I went up there to see White Nights. It was July 2003. So I was in St. Petersburg, Russia, and I took the 3-hour drive east of St. Petersburg to cross the border from Russia into Estonia because I had a scientist I was supposed to meet in Moscow, and he couldn't get his passport in time. And that's a whole other story how he wasn't able to get he should have been able to get his visa to go to Moscow, and he couldn't. So anyways, I'm meeting with this Estonian scientist by the name of Van Voris. And this guy is brilliant. He discovered a way to manufacture plastics, citric acid-based plastics, in such a way that after a few years, they would, without any toxic byproducts, completely decompose and go back into nature. Okay.
Wow.
And it would literally save the planet. I mean, you got in fact, this is one of the footnotes in my book. There's over 5 trillion pieces of plastic garbage in the oceans. There's more plastic garbage in the oceans than there is phytoplankton, the very foundation of life at the very bottom of life, of the pyramid of life on this planet, right? You got more plastic garbage, like 50 times more plastic garbage than you do phytoplankton. And several years ago, it's probably 100 or 200 times by now. But we're poisoning ourselves to death. This guy comes up with a solution, and he was sitting there. And keep in mind, this is July 2003, so we're talking like 14 and a half years ago. He was saying between Dow Chemical and DuPont and the major chemical U.S., they were doing everything possible to make his life a living hell. He had an international patent. He said ultimately he was going to end up working with the Russian government because in the West, they didn't want to hear anything about it. It's like, no, if we can continue business as usual in the plastics business and we destroy everything on life on Earth as a result of it and just completely, turn the planet into our own private dumpster. Well, it's okay if our short-term profits are in good shape. This is the insanity that we're living in. Yeah. So the reason I bring that up is because we can talk about the medical industrial complex, and I talk about it endlessly in the various articles I've written over the last 20 years on the internet. But this same virus has infected every single aspect of life on this planet, every single aspect.
Yeah. Doing business in general is not about helping the other person. It is always about enriching yourself. And in a higher state of awareness, it wouldn't be that way. But when you have a money-based, the problem, this is that biblical expression, money is the root of all evil, and people don't realize why that's true.
the basis of, if everything in your society is based on payment through a money system, where a small group of people have created that system out of thin air, and they can create it, they can give themselves as many trillions of dollars as they want,
Yeah.
and everyone else is expected to basically become slaves to the process of earning these units, this artificial construct that we call money, in order to survive, really just to survive.
Yeah.
That forms the basis of what will end up resulting in, I believe, planetary destruction. I believe if you take it out long enough, they say, how deep does a rabbit hole go? I believe if you keep going down the rabbit hole long enough and you don't stop, you don't get seduced by this concept or that and stay there. If you just keep determining that you are going to keep going down that rabbit hole to see just when does it end, where this actually ends is the destruction of all life on this planet. And I know for some people that don't, there's some people that feel that that's a stretch, but then you'd have to, I provide a very, very, I think, irrefutable series of, with the same degree of methodology that high school students have to prove a geometric theorem using Euclidean principles, right? They have to actually use these, with that same degree of methodical reconstruction. I actually show, if you have runaway government, as we understand government to be, you will end up living on a lifeless planet. You will destroy all life on your planet, because the government has its own principles of thermodynamics. And again, I get into that. That's a whole other area. I get into that. But it basically what governments are is they're energy bloodsuckers, but they exhibit practices that affect all aspects of society, and ultimately enter into a relationship with natural processes around them that are incredibly destructive. And like I say, I go into great detail to prove my point on that.
Yeah, and it seems that governments attract people who are totally psychopathic. When I look at
it's an essential. Yeah, it's an essential. If you're gonna,
you can't perform.
If you had a casino that was run completely dishonestly, and the house never had to give up anything, everyone that went in there was treated as a sucker, and you'd have to have people that were your co-conspirators who were part of it, who were integral to the plan. You couldn't fulfill it any other way. So by the same token, that's why you've got a situation where governments are largely a magnet. I'm not saying everybody in government's a bad person. I used to work in the government. Hell, in the 1970s, I was a cryptologist for the U.S. Navy. I had a top secret clearance. I did this for 3 years. So I'm not saying the people who work in government are bad, but you have a preponderance of people at the very highest levels of power who are psychopathic, because since government is psychopathic, and I get into that in detail in the book. If you have an institution which by its very nature is psychopathic, the most appropriate person to be in charge of running that institution will be a psychopath. Mm-hmm. Anything less, anything that approaches a normal human being who has compassion and empathy for basically the very things that undergird what? Reciprocity. You can't have good people at the highest levels of government. You can't do that. And if you could get them in there, they're going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be a crisis of conscience. I can't do that. I can't.
They will drop out by themselves. Yeah.
I can't be a part of this scheme. They're just not going to fit. So of course, this is why government, especially the larger governments, because again, I go into the fact that smaller governments and larger governments actually have a different principles that guide them, different thermodynamic principles. Mm-hmm. So especially with larger governments, you're going to have the worst possible kinds of people who are in charge. And there's a number of people out there that say that those at the very highest level of government really aren't human. They're hybrid, with ET hybrids or something. I don't know about that part, but yeah, we'll consistently get this. And this, I'm not the first person to have this observation. I remember several years ago when reading Thomas Sheridan in Ireland, wrote a book called Puzzling People. Well, he's written a couple follow-up books since, but the first major one where he kind of espouses his principles on this is called Puzzling People, the Labyrinth of the Psychopath. And he talks about the psychopathic control grid. And it's absolutely true. You know, you've got the worst kind of people that are running the show, and it's driving the whole planet into the ground. And but I believe that we're coming to a crossroad, and it's going to I don't think that I don't share Professor Guy McPherson's, although I have enormous respect for this guy. He's got his website's guymcpherson.com. I have enormous respect for him, and he does an amazing job he has a 32,000 word essay with 62 different ecological feedback loops to show in unmistakable fashion why we have passed the point of return. There's no, on the gross third dimensional physical, there's no changing this. If we were all good little boys and girls, and we got rid of all of our cars tomorrow, and we got rid of all industry tomorrow, and we stopped kicking out these ridiculous levels, you know, I don't want to get into the whole CO2 thing between that and methane hydrate and all these other, because there's so many, we're getting hit from so many different angles. We're getting hit with extinction level inputs from so many different directions. But it's amazing what he puts out. But his point is, once you read these things and you fully grasp it, I beg you, don't commit suicide. That's not my message. Despite the fact that I have enormous respect for my career, it's not because to say, well, our end is near, live a good life. There's something less than satisfying to me in that. And it doesn't comport with what I've experienced in ayahuasca and what other shamans and herbalistas and curanderos and other people who have these abilities I've encountered in my work in the Amazon. It doesn't comport with what they're seeing either. We will have rebirth. What we're going through right now is very painful. And if you're a sensitive soul, it's very difficult. I mean, there's no morning I wake up. There's no morning where I wake up where I just don't feel like crying. I mean, it's such... This planet at this point in time is just so screwed up and getting more screwed up by the day. It's hard if you're a sensitive soul not to live in this world and not be overwhelmed with sadness and dismay. But I do believe in my visions, and I do believe that there's a change of direction coming. And I think it's sooner than later. I mean, could be even within the next 2 years. I think it's coming sooner than later. I made the mistake in my 2012 book of thinking maybe it's associated with 2012, but I realized later that what I was being shown was just very broad brushstrokes toward the direction we're headed in. And everything that's happening right now is, in terms of as I experience, is exactly as I predicted in my 2012 book. So I think there is. I think we have the ability to co-create something better. We all know what's wrong. My book certainly gets into the minutiae of what's wrong and how it's wrong and why the way that things are it can't be. It cannot be altered. But there's something that's coming that's going to overturn the apple cart. So this is not. We are not going to go quietly into that good night.
No, there are some people who say, like Chris Griscom, they tell you to up your frequency. I think that's another way of saying keep the unconditional love that you know is there in your system, in your heart, in your being.
I was told that
flame alive.
I was told when I did the 2012 book, I was told that the earth is the heart chakra of the universe. There's 3 chakras below it and 3 chakras above it. And 5 chakras outside of it. There's a total of 12 chakras, not 7. And what's interesting about that idea of the planet Earth as the heart chakra of the universe is that, I don't know if you've heard of this movie, The Principle, where they've actually got astrophysicists on record saying we can't explain why it appears that the Earth is at the center of the universe. There's, when you actually... analyze they have these radio telescopes that measure how far out the farthest galaxies are. Mm-hmm. And they came to the conclusion that Earth is at the center, that the Earth, which supposedly is this minor insignificant planet that goes around the sun, and then our sun has goes around the Milky Way. It seems, as highly improbable as it seems, they've actually come to that conclusion using, working with radio telescopes. It's not my field, so I don't know that much about it, but that's the whole basis of this movie, and I think it's free online now. Anyways, it's called The Principle.
The Principle, okay. The
Principle. So I thought it was interesting that when I was told that the Earth was the heart chakra of the universe, of course the heart is at the center of the core center chakras. There's 3 above, 3 below. And I thought what was interesting is that what emanates from that is whatever's happening on Earth will affect the entire body, will affect the entire universe. I think that's why there's such a tension right now. Yeah. I have people that have direct access to all kinds of different ET groups down here in South America. I don't know if they'd even be able to practice their craft safely if they were in the U.S. or Canada. But I think that this is indicative that we are in a very special place, and there is a creator that for whatever reason decided to have this grand experiment to see how far could life proceed in the absence of the light and people still exist. How far could things get out of control? How far could a planet be away from the fundamental principles of natural law and still not completely destroy itself? But I think this experiment is about to come to an end. It's like, I think the creator is examining the petri dish and saying, this has really gone very wrong. So it's time to clean out the petri dish and put in a new medium, something like that. Mm-hmm. But that's where we're headed, because it's just this is just so sick and so out of control. I remember there was a point where I had an interview with a guy on May 7th. I have the link in my book. I didn't put it on YouTube. I didn't want it to go on YouTube. I thought, man, this is the kind of thing that would probably cause YouTube to both kick me and the video off. So I'm not going to put it on YouTube.
Yeah.
So he gets approached by this guy who's supposedly a member of the elite. The intermediate comes to him and he says, well, is this guy influential? Says he's a gazillionaire, of course, exaggerating, but to try to make his point. He says, you would know this guy if I said his name. And he wanted to meet privately with Guy McPherson. In the end, he cancels his appointment. But what I thought was interesting is this guy was actually telling the intermediary to tell McPherson, I know that what you're basically saying is true. 10, 15 years, 15 years on the outside. Humanity's finished. I tell you this because the people who are at the very highest levels of the elite, psychopaths, are not. They know that this is an end game, and they know that this doesn't look good for them. They're still going to go through the motions. They've all signed pacts. They've all signed pacts with Lucifer. They've got to finish their contract. They got to finish their contract. But they know. They're not complete. They know that we are on the path right now of complete. That we are headed in a direction where the surface of the Earth will be no more life-bearing than the surface of Neptune. Mm-hmm. That's where we're at. And they know this, which I thought was pretty interesting. That's the most interesting thing, I think, to come out of that particular interview.
Yeah. But then rests the question, what can we do to survive either in the flesh or otherwise?
We're co-creators. We have the piece of the creator within us. We have the ability to...
Yeah.
I actually was on this new Earth that's in another dimension, and I actually described my experiences in considerable detail in the Gospel of 2012, and it was amazing. I mean, to be on this planet, just the movement of a hand, the act of inhaling and exhaling, every movement was an experience of bliss. Everything. Even the movement of the hand. everything was an act of bliss. Every interaction with what was around you, the ability to communicate telepathically with plants and animals, the ability to manifest via thought. I mean, it was a totally different set of principles. And as I say in the book, people will say, well, you probably, you probably experience these things because you were using hallucinogenics. And the irony of that, the real irony of that, is that if your experience with is a psychonaut, the ultimate bad trip is having to come back here. That's the bad trip.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. you were using hallucinogens, and I have to tell people, well, you'd have to, I guess, not using hallucinogenics has caused you to think that what you're living right now should be normal. This should be the standard of normal. This is what normal should be.
Yeah. That's pathetic.
So I've been there. I know what it is. So when you ask the question, well, what can we do? It's the next most logical question to ask. It's a question I'd ask, and I did. And now you're asking it of me now. And what I'm saying is that they can't control our thoughts. They think they can, but they can't. We can use our thoughts to co-create. We can be co-creators. We can enter into a bond, a relationship with the Creator, or going through the heart, where we wish and magnify our desires to live in a world that is surrounded by love, by where the joy of one is the concern of all, where you couldn't imagine living with a miserable neighbor because his pain would affect your joy and you don't want your joy disturbed, where everything around you is just this interplay, this back and forth interplay of all these principles of reciprocity that are at the very foundation of life itself. Where exploitation is not the highest principle that guides your culture. These things can be experienced because we have the ability to co-create. And I spend time meditating every day about the world that I wish to live in, that this place that I actually went to and experienced in the summer of 2012 when I had this experience, that I'm there, that I'm living there, that I've graduated beyond this, that I have left this behind. I had no desire to turn my back and look behind me as Sodom and Gomorrah were rightfully burning to the ground, which is that we have the ability to leave this. So I believe in the power of human thought. I believe thoughts are things. I believe that thoughts that are charged with our emotional intensity,
it's energy,
certain power that the psychopaths in charge of the governments can do nothing about. They can't control our thoughts. So your thoughts charged with your passion can create a world where you are tied in a kind of ongoing relationship with the Creator that spells the joy and bliss and happiness of all. And when you have that experience, you realize that that's what you should be focusing on. You can't spend your time focusing on what a hellhole they've turned this into, which will only get worse because they've put things in place where it's not capable of changing direction. They have, what they've done is they've destroyed all these feedback loops that would be part of a true democracy, if democracy ever actually really existed. It doesn't, but let's just say that democracy somewhere somehow actually existed. It doesn't, but let's say it did. That you'd be able to use these feedback loops to regenerate and move your culture and your society in a better direction. Well, they've destroyed all that. They destroyed all that because they've created this ethos where, either you're with us or against us, and if somehow you don't go along with the current set of policies, that somehow you're an enemy of the state. This is what they've created. So we have to use, it was out of the mind of the Creator that the universe was created. It is out of the mind of us that we have to create our salvation. Our salvation by forming a partnership with the very being that created us, with the source, actually in cooperating with Source to create the conditions for a regenerated world that is a result of this, because this is like the sand that gets kicked in the mouth of the oysters. It may be uncomfortable for the oyster, but out of that process comes a pearl. And we have to, instead of focusing on the sand that went into the mouth of the oyster, we have to focus on the fact that out of this comes the pearl.
Yeah.
That's what I've been told. That's what I've been told, and that's what comports with my experience.
Yeah. We have to change our focus. We have to bring our focus to looking for the pearl and giving it energy.
Right, and that's important. That's why I've got on a limb to do this. I've been to prison twice. I've got a friend of mine, Dr. Richard Sauter. I don't know if you know Richard. So he's written books on the underground and underwater military bases. And
oh, okay, yeah,
yeah, Dr. Richard Sauter. He lives in Caton, north of me, and this guy's been to prison like I don't know how many times. I mean, like dozens of times. He knew that all these nuclear power plants that would be he knew what the result of that would be. Of course, that knowledge has been around forever. Walter Russell wrote Nuclear Suicide in 1958. That's kind of a few years ago, saying you idiots continue building these nuclear power plants. Just keep it up. Just go ahead and keep it up. You will destroy all life on this planet. And he knew what he was talking about. By the way, he entered cosmic consciousness in 1922. Walter Russell was one of the great luminaries of the 20th century. So I think he's behind philosophy.org, the website, but his books, The Universal Mind, an incredible read. It takes you years to really comprehend everything in it, but he understood these things. Even in the 50s, he understood these things, and so did a lot of other people. Albert Einstein was asked what he thought of the miracle of nuclear generated power, and his reply was, well, that's a pretty bizarre way to boil water.
Yeah, exactly. Talking about down to earth.
Yeah. So, so anyways, Richard, so all of us who have tried to learn have gone through enormous personal tragedy to try to set the ship right. And you can't work in this area. You can't be, at this time in human history, you can't speak the truth without somebody putting a target on your back, but either you have the courage to speak your truth and speak what you know to be true, or you've contributed to something far worse. And if you believe, as I do, that if you not only believe in reincarnation, but you believe in the full extent of our, just how far back we go into infinity. I had this is an aside now, I had this experience with my wife. When I do ayahuasca journey, my wife lays next to me and actually records it. She asks questions, answers, and she also records me. So she actually my wife kind of monitors me. Plus you can have health issues sometimes, or you got to have problems getting to the bathroom because the ataxia is so great. So it helps to have a helpmate, and my wife acts in that capacity. So I had this one journey that I took where I turned to my wife. I was going through all my past reincarnations. Oh, wow. And I had this point during this session where I turned to my wife and I said, do you know that just in terms of my reincarnations as women, that I have bore enough children to populate an entire nation?
Whoa.
People have no grasp of how great is the wheel of life and how long any of us have been around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was a profound experience. Gee, beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. I said, just alone in my reincarnations, just as human women, I have bore enough children to populate an entire nation. Profound. It was a really profound. The only other thing that I found on that level, I had this experience of I had a spirit guide take me down to, I don't know, 4, 5, 6,000 feet. I don't know how deep in the ocean, but I was seeing various species of fish that live in these ecosystems that are at very deep depths. And I was hit with this wave of sadness from the spirit guide that was taking me there during the ayahuasca session. And the spirit guide said, do you understand that you are killing a multitude of different species of life that you had never even discovered?
Well,
that you
don't know what you're doing, literally.
You are killing life that you never had the privilege of even meeting. That life forms that you're not even aware of that you're destroying. And I don't know why that just. And then I had another ayahuasca session where I was seeing these various. I was encountering, because you can actually communicate with these plant spirits in a very personal way, just like you and I are communicating right now. You can communicate with plant spirits.
Yeah.
And I realized I was communicating with plant spirits that the plant on our earth was extinct. And what I was told by my spirit guide was that when a plant goes extinct, the plant spirit in the spirit world continues to live. It's a spirit, and mourns its lack of representation in the third dimension. That actually the plant spirit actually mourns the fact that it no longer
can be expressed.
Expressed in the three-dimensional world, and so all these experiences just they change you. They change.
Absolutely.
You, expand your perception of what the world is about.
Yeah, I understand. Whoa. Yeah. Huh. It's amazing. And it seems as if people have to suffer in their lives to come to these places in themselves sometimes. Not everybody, but I experienced this sort of thing, and also the immense amount of unconditional love on sudden, unexpected moments, just like that. Poof, it happened. I was looking out from a plane from San Francisco to Amsterdam, and I looked into the sunset, and then poof. And the person I was with, he looked at me and he said, "What's with you?" And I had that unconditional love just falling into me by way of that yellow sunshine. It was amazing. It's like a trigger.
Yeah, well, it's
amazing.
Our epiphanies, our real spiritual epiphanies. I would agree with you. I would say that I've had spiritual epiphanies that came out of. I mean, I understand the pain I've been through. I mean, I have been ostracized by family members because I ended up in Parade magazine, when all of the United States, is one of the 10 most wanted criminals in the world. February.
I saw the picture. Yeah.
February 8, 2009.
Oh,
my pictures in the paper with Osama bin Laden. I'm on the Interpol red list is one of the most wanted criminals in the world. They came down here and had me kidnapped. And when I got back to the States, they dropped all those charges because it was all bogus. The stuff, well, he's wanted because he's selling dangerous drugs. None of it was true. They said it was, when I got back to the U.S., it was a probation violation, and I spent the next 21 months in federal prison. The story doesn't end there. Jeff Berwick with DollarVigilante.com, he has this event every year in Acapulco, right? This year, his speakers included Ron Paul and a whole bunch of other speakers, including myself. I was actually a scheduled speaker at Anarchapulco. Of course, this year it was, of course, billed as Anarchapulco 2018. So On February 12th, as I'm coming into Mexico, I get put off the line. I'm told that I'm not allowed to, I'm not allowed in Mexico. I'm not allowed in Mexico that has the world's largest concentration of violent drug terrorists in the world, but I'm not allowed into Mexico, right? I'm persona non grata in Mexico. I get thrown into a prison cell. Keep in mind, this happened just a little over 3 weeks ago. I get thrown into a prison cell and have to deal with the just humiliation. And of course, my wife is freaking out. She can't get a hold of me. She thinks my wife thinks I might be dead. And I get thrown into a detention cell. And then I was fortunate. They were debating whether to send me to the U.S., but they ended up sending me back to Ecuador. And that's why I'm here now. I'm talking to you from my home. But it just never stops with these people. You know what they did? They failed to put on the Interpol thing that my entire case was adjudicated in the 2009 to 2011 timeframe. This is the year 2018. This is 7 years later. They've still got it, and they've just recently made a fresh entry. So when I got back to Ecuador, I get approached by Interpol Ecuador because they're represented in every country, and they go, "What the hell's going on here? What happened with you? We can see from your passport that your passport was issued by the U.S. government in 2011. So we know this can't be an issue. But what happened to Mexico?" They were dumbfounded. It just doesn't stop. I mean, I'm at a point where I realize now I'll never be able to travel again because they've got this circuit out there, and I could get rid of it. I could hire an attorney and I could fight it, but it would take me probably $250,000 to get me off of this thing, which I shouldn't be on in the first place. And what this shows, this is kind of underscores a larger principle, is that the psychopaths involved have no respect for their own laws. Facts have no meaning.
No.
Ultimately, laws have no meaning. They just do whatever they want.
Exactly.
They just do whatever they want. So all this thing about, the law, we have to follow the law, that's crock. They just do whatever they want. Yeah,
and they change the laws anytime they want also.
They change their underwear. Yeah, I know. It's just...
it's amazing, yeah. Yeah. In Holland, we just had a law changed that if you are a brain dead patient, they can take out your organs, period. Unless...
Oh, lovely.
You have signed a codicil that I'm not a donor. I'm not an organ donor.
Yeah.
They're in the process of changing that. It's amazing.
Yeah. But again, if...
And the cognitive dissonance with the public and with the politicians, because I know from doctors who have been on this subject for 30, 40 years, Dr. Paul Byrne, that a brain dead person is not dead. The being a corpse that is in the language of the law is a, how you say that? A judicial term. It has to do with
not sure. I actually
lawyer language.
I was focusing on the fact that when you said that, I was focusing on the fact that they've known that forever. This expression that's used in English, "saved by the bell."
Yeah,
it actually has the basis for it is they've known about this forever. Was that in the off chance the person who's supposedly dead, which of course would include brain dead, was be placed in the coffin, and what they do is they drill a hole in the coffin, and they'd attach a cord to the hand of the supposed dead person, so that if the person woke up again, if somehow the person who supposedly woke up again, they could pull the string and bell, and then people would dig up the person and then attempt to bring them back to life.
Yeah.
So they've known about this forever. Yeah. I'm sure that more than a handful of people have actually been cremated while they were still conscious.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I made a bumper sticker. For my car. Organ donation over my dead body.
It's cute. That's really cute.
Yeah, and then you get commentary by people, and then you can talk about it. That's why I do it. But I also have motorcyclists who pass me in traffic doing this because they read the sticker. And I think, and then I'm thinking, you are a main target of the organ donation because it's young motor riders who have accidents and are brain dead.
No, I know at my age, at my age, I'd be clueless as to why anybody would want my organs, but
second-hand stuff. I don't want that.
Yeah.
No. But yes, the whole thing, the period we live in reminds me of the stories about Atlantis, that there was a bunch of priests who were doing wrong things with the energy of crystals, and also
it gets to the same fundamental thing, is that when you have no respect for natural laws, that you decide, well, actually even the biblical story of Babel is the same idea, where you think that you're so high and mighty that you know more than the creator, and you're going to reorder creation because you just think you're so smart. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't work out so well. There is and boy, do you experience this, boy, in altered states, in ayahuasca, you experience this all the time, because at that conscious level, the level of consciousness you enter in when you're in ayahuasca, you have, if you have any sensitivity to the experience at all, and not everyone does. You know, there's an old saying in the Amazon: you don't choose ayahuasca; ayahuasca chooses you.
Yeah.
So not everyone can have. You know, my wife, doesn't have these experiences. For instance, this reason why I do the experience, and she's kind of she is my body's caretaker while I'm doing what I do,
which is very important, by the way. Yeah, absolutely.
It is.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same experience if my wife wasn't there to kind of.
It's great that you are a team like that. Lovely.
I have to believe we're not the only couple that do that. But anyways, you have this experience of the preciousness of life and how rare, just how precious and sacred it is, and why you don't mess with the fabric of natural law. Because there's a supreme wisdom in how it was put together, and you've got all these lesser beings that think that they're smarter than the creator, and they can mess with. That's what's really so horribly wrong with this whole GMO food thing. I mean, quite apart from the fact that the scientific studies show, and this is very I hate actually saying this because it's actually very embarrassing, but because I was closely tied in to an organization in Washington, D.C. called the Center for Science and the Public Interest, and because of that, when they first came out and started saying there's no fundamental difference, initially I actually was supportive. I said, I don't see the difference myself. They did an article on me in the front of the Wall Street Journal in 2000. I was hired by the IFT, the Institute of Food Technologists out of Chicago, to travel around the world and give lectures on this issue. And I was in the embarrassing position where a few years later, I had to retract my position and apologize to the public, because by that time the studies were coming out that clearly showed that the GMO foods were in fact deleterious on multiple levels. It wasn't, this is what happens when we toss the precautionary principle to the winds and we think we're so much smarter than the creator. But even that, I didn't really appreciate it. So I actually had retracted my position, and have since been very vocal about the fact that although initially I didn't see any harm with it, now, oh boy, I sure do now. And I think the studies are very unambiguous. And I think it's very telling that, this came out in the news, at the cafeteria there in St. Louis, the Monsanto employees, they don't have any GMO foods in the Monsanto cafeteria. What the,
double standard. There we go again.
They need to have a new. You need to have a sign. Every major corporation with their company, you need to have a special sign. Warning: psychopaths in charge. Because who thinks of this stuff? Who actually thinks? Unless you're a psychopath, we're going to poison the world because it's good for business. But we need to protect our employees and others that are around us. We need to protect them because they're important.
They are slaves. That's why they protect them, not because they love them. They need them. That's the difference.
Awful. Just awful. Anyways.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I remember Arpad Pushtai, who got degraded as a scientist because he pointed out what happened to rats when they had potatoes, GMO potatoes. Mm-hmm. Oh, God. They got this tiny testicles and tumors all over and this, that, and the other. And that science had to be
right, and it's affected even the people I know. It's affected the dietary habits. People I know. We eat a lot of quinoa here. We eat a lot of foods here that have not been GMO'd yet. So because ultimately it's getting harder and harder to tell what's GMO and non-GMO. Yeah. And there's a lot of these. I don't know if this is true or not. I have somebody I knew in Quito that was a biologist who said that they're sneaking all kinds of GMO corn and rice and everything else into this country, despite the fact that on the books it's illegal. It's illegal. GMO is illegal here in Ecuador, and into the south of us, it's illegal in Peru. But that won't stop them from sneaking it in.
No.
And so you almost have to run to try to find foods to eat that they haven't, for which they don't have a GMO version of it yet. You know, I mean, and here a lot of the natives still eat kiwichi and kanyiwa and these other what they call pseudo cereals. I don't like that. As a botanist, I don't like that term. But foods that they're never going to make a GMO version of kiwichi, which is a form of amaranthus, or kanyiwa, which is like beets. It's another chenopodium. They're never going to. There's not enough money in it. Yeah, that's a good thing. You know, you can rely on these people to do only something if there's a buck in it. You know, at least we can rely on that. It makes their behavior somewhat predictable. We know they're not going to do anything unless they can majorly profit off of it. So yeah, it's affecting, for those of us who are really conscious about these things. We're thinking, well, maybe I should veer in the direction of plant foods for which a GMO version doesn't exist yet. Mm-hmm. Who would have thought like that even 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's ludicrous what happens. What happened in Mexico is that the farmers bought corn that was subsidized in the States to eat. Mm. But being a farmer, they kept some of the seeds, the kernels, and put them in the ground. And that's how Mexico's corn got contaminated with GMO.
Yeah. It's
and there is the stupidity of people. It has no limits. It's infinite, as Einstein said.
Right. I remember that. Yeah, he did.
I remember there was a film, The Future of Food, and the lady who created that film was in Amsterdam, and I was asked to present that film and to have a discussion at the end afterwards. And there was one politician, he was a farmer, and it turned out that he had just become an organic farmer. Before, his cows were not organically fed and things that, so he was a newbie.
Right.
And in that film, it became very clear by this Mexico story, that's why I come to it, that it is always contaminating. The GMOs contaminate the natural species. And this stupid farmer said, well, let's test it in Holland, in the Netherlands, let's test it. And then the whole room was like, what? You just saw that doesn't work, because one field of GMO, it will spread around the other fields. And that is the Canadian farmer, Percy, I think his name was, who lost his whole farm and his silo with I don't know how many years of seeds that he had kept from previous years of organic stuff. He lost all of it because Monsanto had found one stalk of their version of a certain.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, it's jurisprudence terrorism that we're seeing right now. They're going on farmers' lands. If they find one tiny strain of the corn, they're saying, "You owe us pay on the entire field of,
you have infringement of patent, whatever. That's what they say.
Intellectual property infringement. But yeah, this is happening all over. But you know what? That's why I think, and this is why I focus on my book, we have to focus on the larger, bigger picture, because their reign of terror will soon be at an end. And the world that we live in that results from that, be it on this dimension or another, I'll just say another, is determined by the thought forms that we generate now.
Yeah.
Determined by using the same powers, albeit in a very limited way, that the Creator used to set creation into motion, that we can live in a better world, that we can look at all of this, the grand absurdities that surround us at every step. You can't turn anywhere in this.
True. Yeah.
The world, Western civilization has become this apple so rotten that this is an apple for which there is no corner you can take a bite and not get a mouthful of worm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we have to use our thoughts and use thoughts that are charged with the emotions of our passion to create that which transcends a world that cannot possibly be corrected. There's no writing this. This is so corrupt and so deep. There's no writing this. And so rather than trying to correct or right the incorrigible, we have to have the power and presence of mind to create something better. And it begins with our thoughts, because really the way the world is now constructed, it's really all we have left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. And that brings me to my little saying that if I don't live my truth, nobody will. So if I am focusing on what is wrong in the world, I give that energy. Mm-hmm. So I have to turn it around and live my own truth, love, unconditional love in this world. And that has many faces. Because then I give energy to the right thing, to what I do want to have.
Yeah, we can either create a better world, or we can continue to feed the archons, and
the distraction is very strong, because every time they do something so ludicrous.
On the gross third dimensional, it's something I myself have find escaping. As I said, a little more than 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in what amounts to a Mexican jail cell. I mean, it didn't have bars. It was actually a detention cell, but you're still in prison. I'm sorry. I was a little more than 3 weeks ago. Yes. Once again, I was dealing with the indignity of, once again, being imprisoned.
Yeah.
But what has to drive us is our vision of a world the way we know it should be. Or as I say in my 2012 book, life as you know it was meant to be lived. Life as you know you were meant to live it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that has to be something that consumes us. Because if it doesn't consume us, the world as it is now will consume us. So we either take a proactive position to use powerful thoughts that are charged with the emotions of what we know is the fundamental basis of life, the unconditional love that undergirds all life, or we allow ourselves to be consumed by the practices and principles and policies of psychopaths. That's really the fork in the road. That's the choice you make.
That's the choice. Right.
The choice you make to be consumed and allow your life to be guided by psychopaths and play into their world, or you are using the mind that the Creator gave you to co-create with Him a world that is better, a world that transcends this one. And
but like that, it's an easy choice. It's not easy to do. That's different.
No, it's a daily practice. It's something you have to do in every that I try to do even in every moment of every day, because I just can't. I won't allow myself to get sucked into all these just ridiculous absurdities that are just getting worse by the day. And on the gross third dimensional here, it's not going to get any better. It does go downhill from here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are no exterior forces or interior forces that can correct this. And when you finally reach, it's like, McPherson has this thing where he kind of makes light of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, what is it, the 5 stages of grief?
Yeah.
Rage
fear and
and then finally acceptance. I think the final stage is acceptance. And so then he created a 6th stage which he called gallows humor, and then and then he transcended that, and he said, and the 2nd stage of his newly constructed 7 stages of grief, Professor Guy McPherson's 7th stage is called fuck it.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So it's just throwing up your arms, but again, that has to have a meaning and purpose that sets things right. And so it's not, so maybe I should add an 8th stage. No, it's about saying, okay, it is what it is. We've passed a point of no return, and even looking at his 69 different self-reinforcing feedback loops that really, really spell out why this cannot possibly get better from here. It doesn't get better from here.
No, we
have the ability to transcend that into something better, and that we have. I know it exists because I've been there, and I know that it's going to be hard for some of your listeners to grasp that. I did the best job I could in the 2012 book I wrote 5 years ago to try to describe the actual experience that I had. But we are able just to, well, you know what this is an extension of? There's a whole school of thought for people who into business administration, this whole school of PMA, positive mental attitude. It's kind of embodied in things like Clement Stone's work, Think and Grow Rich, and and all these people, right? But there is actually something to that, or even at a deeper level, if you read Harold Percival's Thinking and Destiny, right? Our thoughts have the ability to create, and collectively, when we're working together, our thoughts have the ability to work in unison to actually create matter. It's not the whole biblical idea. The Word was made flesh. The idea that is thoughts. They always talk about the laws of thermodynamics deal with mass and energy, but the amazing thing of it is that consciousness transcends all of that. Consciousness doesn't degrade. Consciousness is not.
No.
Is never victimized by the law of entropy. We, out of thought comes creation. Out of thought came matter. Out of thought comes energy. Consciousness is behind it. In the mechanical sciences, if you talk to someone like Noam Chomsky, they'll tell you, well, consciousness is an epiphenomenon of certain neurophysiological.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's not. Especially when you're in ayahuasca, you actually realize this as clearly as you can possibly realize it, that out of consciousness comes creation, comes matter and energy and everything in between out of consciousness. It's not consciousness that somehow came out of matter. And when you really fully understand that, then you realize because of the fact that you are a conscious being with the ability to think, and that you can enter into this relationship, this partnership with the Creator, that you have the ability to alter this. And I think that's our clarion call. I think that's why this is happening. I think this is the call for those who are ready to graduate to something beyond all this muck.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think, again, this is the sand that got kicked in the oyster, and and we are basically being called upon to work with the Creator to create the pearl, to create the thing that is the phoenix from the ashes, so to speak. But it begins with our belief that it begins fundamentally with our belief that, number one, that we're able to do this, that it isn't within our power to do it, that working collectively to imagine a new earth, a better world, a world that works in accordance instead of it contra-purpose with the Creator, that we're able to create that. And I think out of that, that's what we get. And it starts within the heart. Again, the earth is the heart chakra of the universe. And out of our heart, out of it, this because that's, I know that in certain cultures, they say that when they talk about love, they think it comes from the liver. I do believe the majority of cultures believe it comes from the heart. And that out of this identification with that very fundamental principle of life, that we use that is the clay in the hands of the potter through which we mold our thoughts to redirect the course of our lives. Those of us who are willing to work with one another collectively to live in that world, a world full of joy, a world full of bliss, a world that embodies these Brahmic experiences that I've been having since my early 20s. That is a life worth living. Having that all the time, that is a life worth living. Yeah. And anything less than that, to me, comparatively speaking, is not a life worth living. This is not a life. Being on this planet right now and thinking this is it, this is not living. This is not living. What kind of planet is not living? No. So I think our choice is clear. And I use my best with my limited literary skills to try to and actually provide what I think is the methodology to make it happen.
Well, what you're saying about having that vision, that idea, and putting emotion into it, passion into it, that's exactly what Joe Dispenza is talking about. But he projects it towards healing from illnesses or situations in life. You have the next level of things. You look at a broader, grander scale, but it's the same principle. Passion.
Well, I'm sure it is. I mean, I resonated with what you said, and I understand it. We certainly we use that in our work. We have still have a small herb shop, herbhealers.com, where we provide products, and we also provide free medical consultations to the public. I mean, we charge for the products. We don't charge. We have 2 doctors on staff. We do not charge for our consultations. And I think this is important because we employ the same thing. What you just said kind of ties into Ry Kammer's work, this idea that cancers, for instance, are based on traumas. I would say that a great many medical conditions, including the most chronic, are based on a certain thought patterns that help feed into that. And Ry Kammer's idea that there's a shock syndrome, what he called the basic traumas are behind most cancers and other degenerative diseases. I think is very much on the money. The flip side of that coin is that if it is our traumas that create our illnesses, can it be the reverse of traumas? Can it be our ability to create exalted thought and visualization of a better world that creates the opposite of
to turn it around?
Creates positive condition. What's the other side of that coin look like? I think it looks like what I've been talking about.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Whoa, amazing! This conversation, I loved it.
It's a tour de force.
Yeah, but I like
we were going to go that far when we got started. I never know where I'm going to go with these interviews, and I've been interviewed by
sorry,
Alex Jones and Mike Adams and a whole host of people in the alternative. I've been interviewed by a wide variety of people, and the interesting thing is, you never know the course. Sometimes it's amazingly too. Often an interview is much better than I anticipated. It goes into something where the scope of things is much grander. This interview will count among them, by the way, where the scope of things is actually grander than I had originally anticipated things would go. So it's good. Maybe the hand of the creator is behind it.
I don't doubt that. Yeah. Well, I have not been able to really read your book, but you cover many instances where you see the hand of the psychopaths. They never miss a beat in everything in life.
Yeah, this can't be fixed. I mean, the most important, if I had to sum it all up, I really wish that it's up on Amazon. I think it's $8 now or something. I can't remember, but it's got all the color plates that were produced by David Dees. I was very honored to have him He did the illustrations on the book, which he just did a magnificent.
Yeah, he's great.
I think it's worth the $8 just to have the experience, or the $7.95, whatever, to have the experience of reading the book and actually seeing all his color artwork. But the point, I thoroughly show with a very interdisciplinary approach that the crux, that this cannot be repaired. And I think that's important first. if you're on a ship and it's sinking, before you ever think about getting to the life raft, you have to be convinced. You have to be convinced, this ship is sinking. This isn't going to change. It's not going to get better. The water that's now rushing into the hull of the ship is not going to magically exit the hull of the ship. The ship is sinking. I better get on a life raft. And I'm speaking metaphorically as it results to creating this new Earth. It's important to come to know that there's really nothing that we can do on the gross third-dimensional physical. There's going to be this demarcation, this kind of bifurcation between those who just are going to stay stuck here and those of us who are, again in the vernacular, ready to get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's where and then the last two chapters of the book deals with the commonality of those who are seeing the things that I see in cross comparison, so that you kind of it's based on this basic principle. If you had a piece of paper and you draw a bunch of lines through the piece of paper, one might say that the most important point on that piece of paper is where the maximum number of lines intersect. The point of intersection becomes the point that is most important. And similarly, if you're comparing notes with other people who have, I don't know if I want to say prophetic ability, but like myself are clairaudient or clairvoyant, and where they're able to actually see future timelines, and you're comparing notes because nobody's got all the answers. Nobody. So you want to meet, and you want to communicate with other like minds, because you want to also know the flaws in your own experiences. I have experience. I have flawed experiences or things that I'm not interpreting correctly. So I want to talk to others who have my same talents. They gain certain insights from me. I gain certain insights from them, and that becomes a clarification and a kind of purification of your clairvoyant experiences. And there's a value in this.
Oh yeah. So
I get into that. I get into that at length, and then I talk about this New Earth experience I had because I've been there, and just how important it is to be able to realize that there is a place for those of us who are ready to go, who've been through this, and realize that when you're on a sinking ship, you need to hit the life raft. There's no wishing that the ship is not going to sink. You need to face the reality of what it is, and realize that you have an opportunity to graduate to something better. So that's the first part of the book, and the second half is the actual solution phase. So that's how I approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, what I see with people when I give my presentations about vaccination and sexuality and all those things that have been ruined for us, people want a solution. People want a point of light to focus on, something that is better than the place they are right now. And sometimes, it's hard to give that to them, because most people expect that to reach a point like that passively, but it's hard work. You have to, meditation is work, is putting you to the task of meditation. It's not nothing.
Right. Well, I know a lot about that. Going back to 1971, I went to a seminary. We taught, Ignatian meditation, all different forms of meditation. And in November of 1972, at the age of 16, I actually met Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and was initiated at the TM and then the TM sitting programs. Then I was a student at IMU, at Maharishi International, MIU, for several years, and lived in the community for several years in the late 70s and early 80s. And so my entire life has been about various meditative practices and trying to achieve higher states of consciousness. I just had this intuitive knowledge as a child. I mentioned earlier Richard Maurice Buck's a classic on the subject of cosmic consciousness. I read that when I was 16 years old. That's not a subject that most undergraduates would take, let alone a 16-year-old. But I knew that I had to learn the principles that were in that book, and then that led me in a whole other direction of just trying to understand what abilities we inherently have that would allow us to transcend what I have perceived as a child has been a really screwed up world. From the time I was a child, I'm like, what did I do to land in this place? Really, these are thoughts that have consumed me from the time I was just past toddlerhood. What did I do to deserve to?
Yeah.
What the? What did I do?
Why am I not blonde and dumb? Yeah.
The whole thing.
I remember sitting on my tricycle in Indonesia, 3 years old. I was there in the landscape of Indonesia, and I suddenly thought, oh, look out there's this big wide world, and here am I. Oh yeah, that's fine. That's as it should be. I was 3 years old then. I had this idea of being in the world, not of the world, but in the world. And it was there, and I was here, and that was okay. Yeah.
So
amazing experience.
I think this is a common experience for all of us, and probably like myself, you've encountered a variety of souls that have crossed your path, who likewise have felt, I don't belong here.
I'm in the wrong film. Yeah.
Right. I even when C.S. Lewis wrote Mere Christianity, there's a quote in the book, I'm trying to remember now, something like, and I'm paraphrasing now because I'm horrible at remembering quotes word for word, but the paraphrase of it would be, if you live in this world and you feel that you don't belong here, you feel that you're out of place, then it may be because this isn't your home. It may be because ultimately this is not where you belong. This is a temporary way station. And for those of us who have the consciousness to see just how incorrigibly screwed up this world is, it is a common bond between us. I have bonded with many different men and women that I've crossed my path who had the same, who harbor the same feelings and the same emotions and the same insights. It's like, what kind of hellhole is this? Who could possibly conjure up something this screwed up?
Yeah.
And those of us who are in that class, it becomes a bonding experience. But that out of that bonding experience, I believe, should be something more pragmatic, and that is the creation of our communicating and working together to generate this world that is complete in its alignment with natural law and its alignment with its fundamental principle, which is the source of our joy, which is ultimately going to be the source of our joy and our bliss.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I have a beautiful 7-month-old granddaughter, and she is amazing. And she is the image of the purity of nature, of unconditional love, of cosmos, of God, of everything. So having a mental picture of her, it's very easy to come to that place that you described where you have passion and you want to and reinforce your thoughts in the right direction in what you do want to have.
Right. There you go. Well, we all have our sources of inspiration because especially young souls that come into the world that have yet to be contaminated by everything from the educational system to the
education,
the legal system to all these other institutions around them before. Yeah, so young children are closer to God, as it were, than we are, and from there we can actually get a lot of our inspiration for what we have to co-create. That I believe is the only logical. It's where all this leads to. It's where all this goes to. It's the reason that we're here at this stage, because I don't see a purposefulness. I don't see any rhyme or reason to why you would have a creator. And by the way, this gets into a side topic, but this whole issue of intelligent design, it's beyond me for someone to look at the universe and not see intelligent design that actually thinks that out of the muck all of this orderliness, which itself is, of course, is a violation of the law of entropy. It's a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. But anyways, that out of that that we don't forge something better.
Yeah, we certainly deserve something better. And I think we have 2 more minutes. So I hope you have a beautiful word to end this conversation, this beautiful conversation. And I think people need to listen to it several times to pick up all the little diamonds and pearls that you laid out. Because
I think this comes down to this. We all know what it is to be in a state of happiness. We all know what it's like to be in the companionship of friends and family and those we love. And imagine if all those interconnections that tie you to your environment were full of that same degree of love and joy. And that if people can't use that as a starting point, because all this talk about co-creation, there has to be a starting point for it. And I think if people can actually reach within themselves the starting point of realizing what it means to be in a state of bliss. I've had Brahmic experiences where I just wanted to cry endlessly because the joy and the bliss was just so overwhelming. And not everyone has had the privilege yet to have that experience. But if you can imagine, to whatever degree you're able to, what it would be to live in a life where you don't even know what unhappiness feels like. And the focus on that is the foundation for a life that transcends this one, has to be the basis for it. I can't, in just the course of a few minutes, actually kind of expound the whole course of how my approach to it all, but I can at least provide a starting point that people can get at, because from the starting point, you can keep to feed the thoughts that will eventually lead to these acts of co-creation that collectively we can use to actually create this new earth.
Yeah.
I hope that's helpful.
I hope so too, but I think so. Certainly you have given me food for thought and a new impetus to really focus on what I do want for my children, the world, people around me. And yeah, that's the message of our conversation. So thank you very much, Greg Caton.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a real joy. It's been a real joy. Thank you.
Yeah. So dear viewers, this was the Minority of One report. And even if you are a minority of one, the truth is still the truth.
Humanity has been on an epic journey of discovery, learning the truth about the world we live in. New discoveries about the true origins of humanity, ancient history, free energy, as well as the systematic corruption of world governments are now on the forefront of our daily reality. Is the world headed towards destruction based on control and power? Or is an opportunity now being presented to shift and uplift into a higher consciousness? My name is Mel V, co-founder and creative director of Conscious Consumer Network, an independent broadcast network that was launched on the 1st of January 2015. In the last 3 years, Conscious Consumer Network has broadcast over 2,800 shows in multiple languages, featuring guests from across the world, whilst creating media that is aimed at the creation of a free, fair, peaceful, just, sustainable world. Conscious Consumer Network provides full training and an interactive support network for all broadcasters, and we are always looking for inspiring and educational content.
Hi, this is Lady Liberty.
And this is Mira Siegel.
In 2018, Conscious Consumer Network has expanded to multiple broadcast locations, increasing our availability and reach across the world, remaining on the cutting edge of independent media. If we wish to create a better world, we must first create better media, geared towards real education instead of indoctrination.
You guys really are what changing the world is going to be about. It's educating kids at a grassroots level.
Having become a pillar of stability in the turbulent world of independent media, we have even more going on in 2018. Conscious Consumer Network is a publicly funded network, and we rely on all of you to keep us on the air. Show your support for independent media by donating to our 2018 Network Support Fund. Dare to seek a better world. Support independent media.